On March 28, 2024, something happened in Riyadh that should have been front-page news in every American newspaper. It wasn't. Saudi Arabia and China signed a $9 trillion currency swap agreement. $9 trillion, the largest bilateral currency deal in human history, and it was denominated in yuan, not dollars. For 50 years, every barrel of oil sold on this planet has been priced in United States dollars. Every single one. This arrangement, the petrodollar system, has been the invisible foundation of American economic supremacy since 1974. It's not an exaggeration to say the petrodollar is the reason you can buy a television for $300, the reason your government can run $2 trillion deficits without immediate consequences, the reason the United States can sanction any country on earth and make it stick. The petrodollar isn't just about oil. It's about power. Global, uncontested, unchallengeable power. And it just died in a conference room in Saudi Arabia while Americans argued about social media algorithms. Here's what nobody in mainstream financial media is telling you. This isn't a single deal. This is the culmination of a pattern that has repeated across 500 years of monetary history. The same sequence that destroyed Spanish silver dominance in the 17th century. The same sequence that ended British pound hegemony in the 20th century. The pattern has 4 stages. It has never failed to complete. And the United States just entered the final stage. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how reserve currency systems die. You'll see the 3 historical precedents that prove this pattern is mathematical, not political. And you'll recognize why the next 36 months will determine whether America remains an economic superpower or becomes a cautionary tale. The empire doesn't fall when the armies retreat. It falls when the world stops accepting the currency. Let me show you how this works. Every global reserve currency in recorded history has followed an identical 4-stage collapse pattern. I call it the reserve currency death spiral. Not because the name is dramatic, but because once you enter it, escape becomes mathematically impossible. Each stage creates the conditions for the next. Each stage accelerates the timeline, and each stage appears manageable to those inside the system until suddenly, catastrophically, it isn't. Stage 1, the ascent. A nation achieves reserve currency status through a combination of military dominance, trade supremacy, and monetary stability. Their currency becomes the global standard not by decree, but by convenience. It's the most liquid, the most trusted, the most useful for international trade. During Stage 1, the reserve currency nation enjoys what economists call exorbitant privilege. They can import goods without exporting equivalent value. They can run deficits that would bankrupt other nations. They can print money that the rest of the world is forced to hold. It feels like a superpower. It is a superpower. But it plants the seeds of its own destruction. Stage 2, the overextension. This is where privilege becomes poison. The reserve currency nation discovers they can fund military adventures without raising taxes. They can provide social programs without cutting spending. They can consume without producing. Debt accumulates. Trade deficits widen. Manufacturing migrates overseas because it's cheaper to import than to build. The nation becomes dependent on the very system that empowers it. They must maintain military presence everywhere to protect the currency. They must keep rates low to service the debt. They must keep printing to cover the deficits. The trap is invisible because everything still works. The currency is still dominant. The world still accepts the paper. But the foundation is rotting. Stage 3. The alternatives emerge. This is where we are right now. Competitors recognize the vulnerability. They begin building parallel systems, bilateral trade deals that bypass the reserve currency, alternative payment networks, currency swap agreements, commodity-backed instruments. None of these alternatives is strong enough to replace the reserve currency directly. That's not the point. The point is to create options, exit routes, insurance policies. The reserve currency nation dismisses these efforts as insignificant. Fringe experiments, rounding errors in global finance. They're wrong. Stage 4, the cascade. This is when confidence breaks. Some triggering event, a war, a financial crisis, a political rupture, causes major holders to begin diversifying, slowly at first, then rapidly. The problem with reserve currency status is that it relies entirely on network effects. Everyone uses dollars because everyone else uses dollars. The moment that assumption cracks, the moment alternatives become viable, the network effect reverses. What took 50 years to build unwinds in 5. The reserve currency nation suddenly discovers that all those deficits must be paid back. All that debt must be serviced at real interest rates. All those imports must be matched with exports. The adjustment is not gradual. It is violent. This pattern has executed 3 times in the last 500 years. It has never failed to complete once stage 3 begins. Let me prove it to you. Everyone knows Spain once ruled the world, the empire on which the sun never set. What they don't teach you is how Spain lost everything, not through military defeat, through monetary suicide. And the pattern is identical to what's happening right now. Let me take you back. It's 1545. Spanish conquistadors discover Cerro Rico, the rich mountain in what is now Bolivia. Inside that mountain is the largest silver deposit ever found. Over the next 200 years, Spain will extract 45,000 tons of silver from Potosí alone. 80% of the world's silver supply flows through Spanish hands. The Spanish silver peso becomes the world's first truly global reserve currency. It's accepted in China, India, Africa, throughout Europe. When merchants in Manila want to buy silk, they pay in Spanish silver. When traders in Amsterdam settle accounts, they use Spanish silver. Stage 1 of the death spiral, the ascent, complete. Spain's mistake was assuming the silver would last forever. King Philip II and his successors discovered something intoxicating. They could fund endless wars without raising taxes on Spanish nobles. They could maintain the largest military in Europe. They could build palaces that rivaled heaven itself. All they had to do was keep shipping silver from the Americas. Between 1560 and 1600, Spain fought wars in the Netherlands, France, England, the Ottoman Mediterranean, and across the Americas, simultaneously. The cost was astronomical, but silver made it possible. Here's the problem nobody anticipated. When you flood the world with currency, that currency loses value. Prices in Spain increased 400% between 1500 and 1600. What economists call inflation, the Spanish experienced as a slow-motion catastrophe. Spanish goods became too expensive to export. Why would anyone buy Spanish wool when English wool cost half as much? Manufacturing collapsed. Artisans went bankrupt. The domestic economy hollowed out. But Spain could still import. Silver bought everything, so they imported everything. Food from Sicily, textiles from Flanders, weapons from Milan. Stage 2, the overextension, a nation consuming without producing. Funding empire with printed money? Sound familiar? Stage 3 began in the early 1600s when the Dutch and English recognized Spain's vulnerability. The Dutch East India Company, founded in 1602, began establishing alternative trade networks that didn't require Spanish silver. They created their own financial instruments, bills of exchange, early forms of paper credit, trading systems that bypassed Spanish intermediation. The Bank of Amsterdam, established in 1609, offered something revolutionary, a stable unit of account that merchants could trust more than debased Spanish coins. Spain dismissed these developments. The Dutch were a minor rebel province. English merchants were pirates. Spanish silver remained supreme. By 1648, the Dutch had won their independence. By 1659, Spain was forced to sign the Treaty of the Pyrenees, acknowledging French dominance in Europe. By 1700, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty was extinct, and European powers were carving up Spanish possessions like a holiday turkey. Stage 4, the Cascade. Spanish silver didn't disappear overnight, but confidence in Spanish economic management did. The world gradually shifted to Dutch guilders, then to British pounds. The transition took about 80 years, but the outcome was predetermined the moment Spain chose consumption over production. Here's the detail that should chill you. At the peak of their power, The Spanish genuinely believed they were exceptional, blessed by God, too powerful to fail. The silver would never run out. The empire would never fall. They were extracting 300 tons of silver per year from the Americas when the collapse began. The resources were still flowing. The confidence was already gone. Same pattern, same stages. Stage 1, currency dominance through resource control. Check. Stage 2, overextension through military spending and consumption. Check. Stage 3, alternatives emerge while the empire dismisses them. Check. Stage 4, confidence collapses, system unravels. Check. Now let me show you how it happened again. Faster and closer to home. If Spain's collapse was a slow-motion tragedy, Britain's was a controlled demolition. And the blueprint matters because America is following it step by step. In 1914, the British pound sterling was the undisputed global reserve currency. 60% of world trade was invoiced in sterling. 40% of global foreign exchange reserves were held in pounds. London was the financial capital of the world. The Bank of England had maintained the gold standard for 200 years. The pound was literally as good as gold. When J.P. Morgan wanted to stabilize American finance in 1907, he coordinated with London, not Washington. Stage 1 complete. The ascent, the pinnacle of monetary dominance. Then came World War I. Britain entered the war expecting it to last months. It lasted 4 years. The cost was beyond anything the Treasury had modeled. $9 billion in direct war expenditure. That's roughly $500 billion in today's money. How do you pay for a war that expensive? You borrow. You print. You suspend gold convertibility and promise to restore it later. Britain suspended the gold standard in 1914. They promised it was temporary. But here's what the suspension revealed. The empire's wealth was an illusion built on confidence. The moment Britain admitted it couldn't back its currency with gold, the world began asking uncomfortable questions. If Britain couldn't maintain gold convertibility during a crisis, could they maintain it at all? Stage 2, the overextension. Britain was burning through centuries of accumulated capital in a 4-year bonfire. After the war, Britain made a catastrophic decision. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, restored the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate, $4.86 per pound. The problem, the pound wasn't worth $4.86 anymore. The war had debased it. Trade had shifted. American manufacturing had exploded while British factories converted to munitions production. Churchill later called it the greatest mistake of his life. The overvalued pound made British exports uncompetitive. Unemployment soared to 20%. The coal industry collapsed. The general strike of 1926 paralyzed the nation. Britain was experiencing the same dynamic as Spain 300 years earlier. Currency overvaluation destroying domestic production. Imports flooding in while exports collapsed. But the pride of empire demanded they maintain the facade. Stage 3 accelerated throughout the 1930s. The United States, now the world's largest creditor, began building alternative financial infrastructure. The Federal Reserve, established in 1913, was asserting itself as a rival to the Bank of England. American banks were funding global trade that once flowed through London. More critically, the dollar had something the pound no longer possessed: credibility. By 1940, Britain's gold reserves were nearly exhausted. When Churchill needed American weapons to fight Hitler, he had to pay in gold, in securities, in real assets. The Lend-Lease program wasn't charity. It was liquidation of British imperial wealth, transferred across the Atlantic. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the world's monetary architects gathered to design the post-war financial system. Britain sent John Maynard Keynes, the most brilliant economist of his generation. Keynes proposed a new international currency, the Bancor, that would prevent any single nation from dominating global finance. The American delegation, led by Harry Dexter White, had a different idea. The dollar would become the world's reserve currency, backed by gold, anchored by American economic supremacy. Keynes fought for weeks. He lost. The Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the global reserve currency. All other currencies would peg to the dollar. Only the dollar would be convertible to gold at $35 per ounce. The British pound, after 200 years of dominance, was officially demoted, not through military conquest, through monetary mathematics. Stage 4, the cascade, complete. Britain's share of global reserves fell from 40% to under 10% within 3 decades. The empire dissolved shortly after. India, the crown jewel, independent by 1947. African colonies gone by the 1960s. Military withdrawal from east of Suez by 1971. The currency died first. The empire followed. But here's the detail that never makes it into the history books. The British saw it coming. Internal Treasury memos from the 1930s document clear awareness that the pound was losing its reserve status. Bank of England officials wrote detailed analyses of American financial competition. They saw the pattern. They understood the stages. They couldn't stop it, because by stage 3, the mathematical constraints are already locked in. The deficits are too large. The alternatives are too established. The confidence is too fragile. The only question is how fast the final stage executes. For Spain, it took 80 years. For Britain, it took 30. For America, given the speed of modern finance, it may take less than a decade. Now let me show you how America extended the pattern. How they bought 50 extra years that should have ended in 1971, and why that extension is now expiring. August 15th, 1971. Richard Nixon addresses the nation. He announces the United States will no longer convert dollars to gold at $35 per ounce. The Bretton Woods system, established just 27 years earlier, is dead. Here's what that meant. For the first time in human history, the world's reserve currency had no tangible backing, no gold, no silver, nothing but the promise of the United States government. The dollar should have collapsed. The death spiral should have accelerated. Stage 3 should have begun immediately. It didn't. Because of a masterstroke of geopolitical genius executed in 1974. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Riyadh with a proposition for King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. The deal was simple but unprecedented. Saudi Arabia would price all oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars. They would invest their surplus oil revenues in U.S. Treasury bonds. They would use their influence in OPEC to enforce dollar pricing across all member states. In exchange, the United States would provide absolute military protection for the Saudi regime. Weapons, training, intelligence, an implicit guarantee that American power would preserve the House of Saud. The Petrodollar system was born. This wasn't just an oil deal. This was a mechanism for forcing the entire world to hold dollars. Think about it. Every nation needs oil. Every nation must acquire dollars to buy oil. Those dollars must be obtained through trade with America or by selling goods that Americans want. The petrodollar didn't just back the currency with oil. It created permanent global demand for dollars, regardless of American economic fundamentals. The effects were transformative. America could now run unlimited trade deficits because the world needed dollars for energy purchases. America could print money because excess dollars were recycled into treasury bonds. America could fund global military operations because the currency remained strong despite massive spending. The petrodollar extended stage 1 artificially. It masked the symptoms of stage 2. It delayed stage 3 by decades, but it didn't eliminate the pattern. It compressed it. Every year of delayed reckoning was a year of additional debt accumulation. Every year of artificial strength was a year of manufacturing decline. Every year of consequence-free printing was a year of credibility erosion. The time bomb wasn't diffused. The timer was extended. And now the timer is expiring. Between 1974 and 2020, the petrodollar system faced no serious challenges. OPEC nations occasionally grumbled but always complied. Countries that threatened dollar pricing, Iraq in 2000, Libya in 2011, faced regime change. The message was clear. The petrodollar was not negotiable. Then came 2022, when the United States froze $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves following the Ukraine invasion. Every country on earth received the same message. Dollar reserves are not sovereign wealth. They're permission slips that can be revoked. The weaponization of the dollar, once a source of strength, became a catalyst for stage 3. If your reserves can be frozen, they're not really your reserves. If your trade can be sanctioned, the dollar isn't really neutral. If the rules can change overnight, maybe it's time to find an alternative. The message was received, and the response is now visible. Let me show you exactly what's happening right now, and let me give you specific numbers, specific dates, and specific deals, because this isn't speculation. This is documented reality. Stage 3 of the reserve currency death spiral is fully operational. March 2023. China brokers a normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Two countries that had been sworn enemies for decades, reconciled through Chinese mediation. Not American mediation, Chinese. This wasn't just diplomacy. This was a demonstration. China was signaling that it could provide the security guarantees that once only America offered. December 2023. Saudi Arabia officially joins the BRICS economic bloc. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, now Saudi Arabia. The world's largest oil exporter aligning with a group explicitly designed to reduce dollar dependence. February 2024. Saudi Arabia announces it will accept yuan for oil sales to China. Not exclusively, not immediately, but the door is open. March 2024. The $9 trillion currency swap agreement. Here's what that deal actually means. Saudi Arabia and China can now conduct trade directly in their own currencies. No dollar conversion, no SWIFT system, no American financial intermediation. $9 trillion over 10 years represents approximately 35% of total projected Saudi-China trade. That's 35% of oil purchases between the world's largest importer and the largest exporter conducted outside the dollar system. The petrodollar isn't dead yet, but it's on life support. But Saudi Arabia is just one data point. Let me show you the full picture. In August 2023, BRICS invited 6 new members: Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and Argentina. Argentina later declined, but the pattern is clear. BRICS now represents 46% of the world's population, 29% of global GDP, 44% of global oil production, and 42% of global grain production. This is not a club of minor nations. This is an alternative economic architecture. More critically, BRICS is actively developing alternatives to dollar-based systems. The new development bank, headquartered in Shanghai, provides infrastructure financing that doesn't require IMF approval or dollar denomination. The BRICS payment system, still in development, aims to bypass SWIFT entirely. Russia and China already conduct bilateral trade through their own SPFS and CIPS systems. The mBridge project, backed by the Bank for International Settlements, is testing central bank digital currency transfers that eliminate dollar intermediation entirely. Participants include China, Thailand, UAE, Hong Kong, and Saudi Arabia. Every single one of these developments would have been unthinkable in 2015. In 2025, they're operational reality. Now let's look at the actual reserve numbers. In 2000, the US dollar represented 71% of global foreign exchange reserves. Today, it's 58%. That 13 percentage point decline represents approximately $3 trillion in central bank holdings that shifted out of dollars into alternatives, primarily euros, yen, yuan, and gold. Gold deserves special attention. In 2022, central banks purchased 1,136 tons of gold, the highest annual total since 1967. In 2023, they purchased another 1,037 tons. The buyers, China, Russia, Turkey, India, Poland, Singapore, countries explicitly seeking alternatives to dollar reserves. When central banks buy gold at record levels while reducing dollar holdings, they're not making investment decisions. They're making survival decisions. Layer on top of all this the fundamental mathematics of American debt. The United States national debt is currently $36.2 trillion. Annual interest payments now exceed $1.1 trillion. That's more than the defense budget, more than Medicare. The Congressional Budget Office projects debt will reach $50 trillion by 2034 under current policy. That's not a political projection. That's mathematical extrapolation of existing commitments. Here's the deadly connection. The only reason America can service this debt at manageable interest rates is because the world holds dollars as reserves. Foreign demand for treasuries keeps rates artificially low. What happens when that demand declines? We got a preview in October 2023 when 10-year Treasury yields spiked to 5%. That spike occurred because of relatively modest foreign selling. Imagine what happens when Saudi Arabia, China, and BRICS nations systematically reduce Treasury holdings over a decade. Interest rates rise, debt service costs explode, deficits expand, more debt issued, rates rise further, a death spiral within the death spiral, and here's the variable nobody wants to discuss. If major oil exporters begin accepting yuan, the structural demand for dollars collapses. Currently, every country on Earth must maintain dollar reserves for energy purchases. Japan, Germany, India, they all need dollars to buy oil. That requirement forces approximately $8 to $10 trillion in permanent dollar holdings globally. Remove that requirement, even partially, and those reserves become unnecessary. They get sold, they get converted, they go home, and when trillions of offshore dollars return to American shores, what happens? Inflation. Not 3%, not 5%, potentially 15-20% annually as the currency adjusts to real value rather than artificial demand. This is stage 4, the cascade, and the mechanisms are already in motion. The final piece is understanding China's strategy. China isn't trying to replace the dollar with the yuan next year. They're building a 20-year transition, bilateral deals, regional agreements, slow de-dollarization that doesn't trigger American military response. The Belt and Road Initiative has financed $1 trillion in infrastructure across 150 countries. Much of that financing is denominated in yuan. Those countries now have economic relationships with China that bypass American financial infrastructure entirely. When the Indonesia-China high-speed rail completes, Indonesia doesn't need dollars to pay the operating costs. When Kenya's Chinese-built port processes cargo, the transactions can settle in yuan. When Pakistan's CPEC corridor moves goods from Xinjiang to the Arabian Sea, the dollar is optional. This isn't about a single deal. It's about building a parallel world that doesn't need American permission to function. And the $9 trillion Saudi agreement isn't the end of that process. It's the beginning of the end game. Let me give you the roadmap of what comes next, not as prediction, but as pattern recognition. The same stages that executed over 80 years for Spain, 30 years for Britain, are now executing at internet speed. 2025-2026. Acceleration of bilateral deals. Expect a cascade of announcements. India-Russia rupee-ruble oil trading is already operational. Gulf states will expand yuan acceptance. African nations using Belt and Road financing will shift payment systems. Each deal alone seems small. Collectively, they create critical mass. The United States will respond with pressure, sanctions threats, military posturing, but the leverage is diminished. When you've already frozen Russian reserves, the threat is priced in. 2026-2028, reserve composition shift. Central banks that have been quietly diversifying will accelerate. The dollar's share of global reserves, currently 58%, will likely drop below 50% within this window. This is the psychological threshold. When the dollar is no longer majority held, the perception shift becomes self-reinforcing. Treasury yields will rise as foreign demand softens. The Federal Reserve faces an impossible choice: let rates rise and crash the domestic economy, or buy treasuries themselves and accelerate inflation. There is no good option, only less bad options. 2028, 2030, the adjustment. This is when Americans feel the shift in their daily lives. Import prices rise as the dollar weakens. Goods that once seemed cheap become expensive. The standard of living that relied on global dollar demand begins to normalize. The adjustment won't be evenly distributed. Those with assets denominated in foreign currencies or real goods will be protected. Those with savings in dollars, fixed incomes in dollars, wages in dollars, they absorb the adjustment. Wealth transfers from creditors to debtors, from holders of paper to holders of things. This is not apocalypse. This is reversion to mean. America will remain a major economy, but it will no longer enjoy the exorbitant privilege that has subsidized consumption for 50 years. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to show you what is. But consider the implications. If the dollar loses 30% of its purchasing power over a decade, what happens to your savings account? If import prices rise 50%, what happens to your cost of living? If Treasury yields spike, what happens to mortgage rates, car loans, credit cards? The pattern suggests preparation, not panic. Diversification across currencies, ownership of real assets, reduction of dollar-denominated debt, skills that produce value regardless of which currency dominates. The Spanish who saw the silver running out had options if they acted early. The British who recognized pound weakness in the 1930s could position accordingly. Those who waited until stage 4 discovered their options had evaporated. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, the dollar has survived every crisis. Every prediction of collapse has been wrong. This time is no different. And you're partially right. The dollar will not go to zero. The United States will not become Zimbabwe. The world economy will not return to barter. But that's not the question. The question is whether the dollar maintains its current privilege, whether American living standards continue to be subsidized by global demand, whether the debt can be serviced at manageable rates. The British pound still exists. Britain is still a developed economy. But Britain in 2024 is not Britain in 1914. The adjustment was real. The privilege was lost. The empire dissolved. That's the pattern. The not collapse, normalization, and normalization for a nation that has spent 50 years consuming more than it produces will feel like collapse. Let me bring this back to where we started. $9 trillion, Saudi Arabia and China, a deal denominated in yuan, the largest bilateral currency agreement in human history. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a negotiating tactic. This was the visible emergence of stage 3 in the reserve currency death spiral. The pattern has now repeated for 500 years. Spain, silver supremacy, overextension through endless wars. Alternatives emerge in Amsterdam and London. Confidence collapses. Empire dissolves. Czech, Britain, pound sterling hegemony. Overextension through world wars. Dollar alternative backed by American production. Bretton Woods formalizes the transfer. Empire dissolves. Czech, America, petrodollar supremacy. Overextension through global military presence and debt accumulation. Yuan alternatives backed by Chinese production and Saudi energy. The transfer is now underway. The mechanism is mathematical. The outcome is historical. The only variable is timing. For Spain, stage 3 lasted 80 years. For Britain, 30 years. For America, given modern financial velocity, perhaps 10 to 15 years. That window began in 2022 when the dollar was weaponized against Russia. It accelerated in 2024 with the Saudi-China agreement. It will complete when the dollar's share of global reserves drops below 50%. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you this because the pattern is visible to anyone willing to look. The Spanish saw it and did nothing. The British saw it and couldn't stop it. Americans have one advantage our predecessors lacked. We can see it in real time. The question is whether that visibility translates into preparation. The empire doesn't fall when the armies retreat. It falls when the world stops accepting the currency. The world is building alternatives right now. Today. While most Americans don't even know what the petrodollar is. If this video changed how you understand global finance, if the pattern is now visible to you, I need you to subscribe. Not for the algorithm. Because the next video is where I show you exactly how wealth transfers during currency transitions, who wins, who loses, and how the positioning happens before the cascade, because this story is far from over. The $9 trillion deal was the announcement. The consequences are still unfolding. Hit the notification bell. When stage 4 triggers, it will move fast. And the information you need won't be on the evening news until the opportunity is passed. The pattern has never failed to complete. I'll see you in the next one.